Battle Line podcast, and many of you are probably looking at your feed, whether it's an Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, and you're like, wow, this episode is up Thursday. You just put up an episode Tuesday with Don Dokken. So the reason for that is that we scheduled Kirk Lippold, Commanding Naval Officer of the USS Cole, and that attack occurred on October 12th of 2000. So Chris really said we should do this for the anniversary, and then also getting Dan Gordon on. It's very timely to cover the attack on Israel. So we're getting it up early. You're not going to have an episode up Tuesday. This is that episode.
And yeah, Kirk's been a friend for a while. And it's just was weird to me that like, how have I never had Kirk Lippold on? And he's an amazing tactician in his own right, and being part of an incident that, in my opinion, was just as famous or infamous, or however you want to look at it, whatever side of the lens you want to look at it, as what happened to me in Benghazi. I was like, well, how the hell have we not had Kirk on to talk about him and what happened on the USS Cole? And so to me, it was a no-brainer. I'm just glad he agreed to come on. I'm glad he wasn't pissed off at me and said, "What? Son of a bitch, what? Why did you have me on your first 5 shows?" But Kirk's not like that. And as everybody's finding out, and we'll find out if you didn't ever listen to Kirk speak, just the nicest, most humble individual in the world. And he did a fantastic job being commander, but you'll hear that in the show. So just wonderful guy. I love having him on.
I was just glad I got him to drop an F-bomb, because he's too much of a quiet professional. Sometimes guys come on here and they're dropping F-bombs every 2 seconds, and I have to be like, let's calm it down a little bit. But I was like, could this guy at least drop one? And he did. And it was a great interview. But
he does too much Fox stuff. There's too much damn regular news shit where they can't say that stuff. So but he did. He loosened his tie a little, a little bit. Metaphorically there towards the end. He did. Yeah.
So before you guys hear the first interview with Dan Gordon, this podcast is sponsored, of course, by our great friends at Bubs Naturals. I just received a giant shipment that I am never going to be able to finish, of so much stuff from Bubs Naturals: collagen protein, Halo creamer, MCT oil powder, all stuff that I'm familiar with. However, this was my first time trying Hydrate or Die. And you know what? I'm actually getting over a cold right now. And typically I would go get Gatorade and that type of thing, but it was great to get a hydration packet that is just essentially coconut water and the lemonade flavoring, and not filling myself up with all that sugar and all that crap. So I am a big fan of Hydrate or Die now. Great product as always from our friends at Bubs Naturals.
Good stuff. It's been starting to get colder, so I haven't used it in a while, but they did just send me, and what I've used lately here is that instant coffee with the Bubs Natural with the
Bubs Brew,
Halo cream. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that stuff is fantastic. So being a coffee connoisseur like I think I am, I think I know.
Although you put too much sugar for yourself to call yourself a coffee connoisseur.
I do. It depends. Depends on the day. If it's evening in the day, I'm getting my coffee for dessert. I'm going to put 10 packs of sugar in that sucker in the morning.
Insane.
Maybe not. So it's my dessert. It's either that or a candy bar. I'd rather have coffee. But the Bubs Brew, just a standard brew that you can actually even put in a Kirk if you want to. If you don't want to ground it, put it in a drip coffee maker, and then the instant coffee. Fantastic. And the instant coffee comes with the Halo creamer already in it when in the pouch, so you don't even need to add it. So it's perfect for traveling. So when I can't get to a place that has decent coffee, I'll just take the instant, and it's fantastic. And it already has that Halo creamer with the MCT oil, so I don't need to take the MCT oil with me anymore either. So it's convenient, and it's outstanding. So Bubs, nice job on the coffee, guys. You guys are doing great. Keep it up.
Yeah, and you're rocking the Bubs Natural shirt, which I have the same one. Drive it like you stole it on the back. I always rock that. So you'll get 20% off everything, including shirts, including everything we're talking about, when you go to bubsnaturals.com and use the promo code BattleLine. That's bubsnaturals.com. Promo code BattleLine for 20% off.
From Kansas City to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal, engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Chris Tonto Peranto.
Switch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
You know, Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battle Line Podcast.
This Switch is on Battle Line Podcast, and our featured guest for today is Kirk Lippold, which Tonto will be on for, Commanding Naval Officer of the USS Cole. But with what's going on in the world, I thought it was extremely pertinent to talk about Israel. And my go-to guy, really, when we do cover Israel, is Dan Gordon, who I've been trying to get on this show for a while, and we will do a full interview, but I figured at least to do an update. IDF Sniper, Hollywood film writer, best known for The Hurricane, Wide Earp, Surf Ninjas. And actually, I've known you for a long time now, because when I met you was when you did the fiction series really based on reality of what's going on at the Gaza Strip. And I think that was like a decade ago.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's 2014.
Wow. It's been a long time, and we definitely will do a full interview. But yeah, I mean, there's so many people giving their speculation as to what's going on. You're someone who's actually been on the ground there, and I think people are sick of seeing the talking heads on TV many of the times who haven't even been to Israel, really have no idea what's going on. And I mean, it's horrendous what we're seeing. And I figured you'd be the guy to give us some insight into the reality of the situation on the ground.
Yeah. Well, I think pretty much everybody has said it's unprecedented. It's beyond unprecedented. And what I'm giving you is just my beliefs, okay? I think this is something that's been in the planning. Well, it's obvious it's been in the planning for a long time. My guess is you're talking about 8 months to a year. There have been conferences which everyone knew about that were taking place in Lebanon between members of the Iranian Guard, the Quds Force, their top guys, Hezbollah and Hamas, numbers of meetings taking place in Lebanon. So my belief that this entire scenario that is playing out and yet to play out was planned by Iran in conjunction with Hezbollah and Hamas. I think what you're seeing with Hamas is a year ago was beyond Hamas's capabilities. I think they've brought in the best guys from the Quds Force and from Hezbollah and changed all their tactics and all their doctrine. Israel knew about those meetings. We expected an attack almost exactly like this to happen, but on the northern border from Hezbollah. We assumed and we knew that Hezbollah's plan was going to be to cross the border in masses, grab as many civilian villages as possible, take hostages. We thought primarily that's what it would be. Even with knowing what we knew, we didn't envision the barbarity of the massacre and the mass murder that's taken place. We didn't consider we could be dealing with ISIS. And Hezbollah are not known for being terribly nice chaps, but our conception was that they were not ISIS. So we never envisioned the kind of, honestly, I'm a professional writer, and I am at a loss for words to describe the barbarity of the slaughter, of the massacre that's taken place. The Nazis, honestly, were more humane. ISIS was more brutal and less efficient than the Nazis. The Nazis brought good German engineering to it, but they were more humane. The barbarity that we're seeing now is on a level that simply could not imagine taking place. We thought that attack, absent the barbarity that we've seen now, would take place in the north. So we transferred some pretty elite units up into the north, and we took precautions. And my former unit had some of its best battalions up there, and I won't say who they were or what they were.
And it's
there
at the Gavanti Brigade, which you were the oldest member to serve in, right? So,
and there were articles in the press about one of our battalions that was up there. That was it's a special forces battalion, and people said, we're awaiting the attack. We're like a coiled spring. At the same time, there was a sort of disinformation campaign, and my hat's off to the military planners of this, who put out stories that Hamas was really concerned with the economic well-being of the people in Gaza. They were concerned that there were demonstrations against it, and they really did not want to risk a war. They had made some gains economically in the last couple of years. Israel was renewing permits for workers to work in Israel. There were 20,000 some odd Gazans who were working in Israel, bringing in money. And they wouldn't go to war. So Israel's eyes were on the north, expecting an attack. And I believe that was very purposeful. It was obviously very successful. And while Israel's eyes were on the north, the attack came from the south. Like I say, what we didn't expect or think of or imagine was the kind of barbarity that we're now learning is even worse than what we have seen in the last 24, 48 hours. I mean, now they've started to let people into Kfar Aza, and now I'm starting to hear from people on the ground who I know. You have whole families burnt to death in their homes. You have a mother laying next to her fetus, still connected by an umbilical cord, who was executed. You have babies who were beheaded in front of their families. There aren't enough tears to cry, and there are not enough bullets to avenge. There isn't a hot enough place in hell, doesn't exist, for what's taken place. People have done backflips to try and create a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And I would say to those people, to the ones who marched in New York, to the ones who marched in LA, to the people on the campuses in the most elite colleges in the United States, if you can see a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas, after you've seen the images that you've seen, then I would question why God gave you eyes. If you start to talk about proportionality, which people are starting to talk about, and they're saying this is just awful that Israel is going to shut off the electricity to Gaza, they're going to shut off the fuel to Gaza. That's barbaric. How can they possibly do that? How do you supply electricity and food and humanitarian aid and diesel fuel to the people who are raping your daughters, murdering babies, dragging old women out of bed and shooting them, killing children in front of their parents, killing parents in front of their children, dragging the naked body of a dead girl who was taken from a so-called festival of peace, and create a moral equivalency? When you talk about proportion, I would want to know, how much fuel did the United States supply Nazi Germany during World War II, or the Brits? How much electricity did we supply to ISIS? What humanitarian aid did we send in to ISIS? For people who would talk about the proportionality that Israel should maintain, I would ask them to explain to me the algorithm which allows you to calculate the proper proportional response to a mother lying next to her fetus, still connected to the baby with an umbilical cord who's been executed. What's the proper proportional response for the children massacred in front of their parents, or the parents massacred in front of their children, or for any one of the 260 bodies of young people who went to a festival of peace? Give me that calculus. Give me that algorithm. Explain it to me.
Yeah.
And when you can do that, I'll be happy to consider it. But until that point in time, keep your damn mouth shut, hang your head in shame, and allow the Israeli Defense Forces to do what we have to do to fulfill the first obligation of any military or any government, which is to protect your civilians.
Do you put any of the blame? I'm just wondering, because this is, of course, what's going to be speculated on in America, on the current administration, because as you said, this has been planned for a year. People are going to say, hey, under the last administration, we had 4 years of relative peace. People said when we moved the embassy to Jerusalem, it was going to create World War III. It obviously didn't. And now we're seeing more instability in this region of the world, more than probably in my entire lifetime.
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate on that. I think there's going to come a time for what we call in Hebrew cheshbon nefesh, an accounting of the soul, for a lot of people in the Israeli military, in the Israeli intelligence community, in Israeli political life, on both sides of the spectrum. And there's probably going to be an accounting of the soul that's going to be necessary for a lot of people all over the world, including in the United States government, on both sides of the spectrum, by the way. I don't think that time is now.
Sure.
Now, people have got to be united about one thing, and that is Hamas has got to be obliterated, not just for Israel's sake, primarily for the sake of the people of Israel, who we still are members of the human race, despite what you'll hear from some quarters. But for Western civilization to turn a blind eye to this type of barbarity and not join in every effort to obliterate it invites that barbarity into your own home. Trust me that the people of Hamas, like the people of ISIS, look at Israel as a first target, not a last target. We're the little Satan. America is the big Satan. And we have certainly, and I'll tell you that right now, and that's what I wrote that fictional series about. We
Sure.
have a real problem at our southern border. Israel had a problem at its southern border. We have a real one at ours as well. And
Absolutely, more than ever right now. We just had former CIA targeter Sarah Adams on the show, and she was speaking about how Afghanistan is issuing passports to anybody, and that if you could be a terrorist from Palestine, from Pakistan, they will issue you your passport, and no one is checking. Our border is completely open right now.
Yeah, and forget passport. You can just walk across the border.
Yeah.
And there, forget 180 people or something like that were on the terrorist watch list that we know of, that got in and already here, and we didn't apprehend them, and they're here. I don't know the ones we haven't identified. So unless the world, the civilized world, sends a clear message that this is beyond the pale, you do this and you will be obliterated, then you're inviting it into your own backyard, and it will get there. It absolutely will get there. If the world has not learned, and I think that what we're doing, stopping the Russians in Ukraine, is a good thing. I think the Ukrainians are fighting a battle for us, because if they go through Ukraine, then they're in the Baltic states, and then it'll be NATO. So I think we're getting away with a cheap bill supporting the Ukrainians fighting the Russians, because they're fighting our fight there. Because if Russia isn't checked, it will expand westward into Europe. But the same applies for this type of barbarism. If it's not checked, you're opening the door and saying, well, it's acceptable. It's acceptable because they're freedom fighters. It's not barbarism, it's resistance. Well, that's bullshit. That's just bullshit. It is a barbarity on a level that I just haven't seen. You know, you've seen the barbarism was in, you know, when the Houthis were against the Hutus and the Tutsis. Yes, that was a horrific barbarism. People were hacked to death with machetes. But it wasn't as well organized and well planned and methodically put together. It was sort of an ongoing, out of control riot amongst rival tribes. This was something that people sat down and calculated and said, okay, this squad here is going to go to Kibbutz Kfar Aza. When you get there, pull people out of their beds, murder as many as you can. That wasn't out of control. It was planned. Instill terror, live up to your name. You're a terrorist, better instill terror, and then make sure we take hostages as well. And I think that was a huge miscalculation on Hamas's part. I think Hamas thought if they could get a significant number of hostages, as they have done, 100, 150, 180, whatever the number is, that Israel would be paralyzed. That they would say, look, they gave us 1,000 people for one soldier named Gilad Shalit. What will they not do if we have 150 people, and they're men and women and children and old people now that will tear at their hearts? You know, the Hamas spokesperson, Mr. Abu Odeh, who was my opposite when I was a military spokesperson, once famously said, the Israelis love life more than any people on earth, and that's why we'll defeat them, because we love death. And I think their miscalculation was that if they could bring in that number of hostages, we would be utterly paralyzed, and we'd fall down and we'd say, whatever you want, please, please, dear God, don't do this to our loved ones. We'll capitulate. We'll do whatever. And it was a very big miscalculation, because it, and I'll say something that I've not said to anybody else. They miscalculate the Jewish people's collective DNA. And I had a very dear friend named Amos Oz, who was Israel's greatest novelist. He was a beautiful man, a former tank commander when he was in the military. And Amos said something extraordinarily profound. He said, you take any Jew of any age, scratch his arm, and just beneath the surface of the skin, you'll see the numbers. Every one of us has a sense that were we alive during the Holocaust and trapped in Europe, 1939, 1940, either we would have stood at the edge of the pit and been shot, or we would have been beneath the floorboards of some righteous Gentile who risked their lives to hide us until we were caught, or we would have been in the death camps, without exception. Without exception.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
The last thing I just wanted to ask of you, and like I said, we'll go short on this one, and we'll do a more in-depth interview soon. But what when you talk about obliterating Hamas, I mean, what is the cost of that? I think a lot of people who listen to this show do worry about when you're talking about Ukraine, and I think they do worry about this idea of America being the world police. And you see people like, I know Nikki Haley this morning or yesterday talking about bombing Iran. I do think there's a concern of America can't be everywhere and be the police of everywhere when we have so many problems at home, the cost of war at home, guys coming back, losing limbs, guys not coming back at all. I mean, what is the human cost and the monetary cost of doing that to truly obliterate Hamas?
I think it's going to be months, not weeks. I think it could easily be a half-year campaign. Israel has plans that have been on the shelf to do exactly that. It's never had the political will to do it. It always did a cost-benefit analysis and said, this is like cancer. We can manage it. We don't have to cure it. Now we've got to cure it. The cost of not doing it for Israel is not even a consideration because it's an existential threat to us. It's also an existential threat to that whole region. I mean, to people who were old enough to remember the oil embargo of 1973, if this is allowed to roll into what it could roll into as a regional conflagration and isn't solved, and Hamas isn't taken out, and Iran isn't chastised, because this will be a blow to Iran, then the cost to the West will be far greater than supporting Israel. And Israel doesn't want anybody to fight its fights for us. We don't want American troops in the Middle East. We don't want you to bomb Iran. If we have to bomb Iran, we'll bomb Iran. If it's in America's interest to bomb Iran, which it may well be at one point in time, Israel will be there to help. But this is Israel's fight. We're going to want to be able to buy the equipment that we'll need to be able to continue that fight. But there's a two-way street there. Iron Dome exists because of Israeli-American cooperation. America didn't develop it by itself. Israel didn't develop it by itself. It was a joint effort. It's now used to protect American troops, and will be.
Yeah, very true.
So there's a mutual benefit to our relationship. It's not simply us taking handouts. It's Israel's been called the largest aircraft carrier in the world for the United States. We are.
Yeah, I do think people forget that. So much of the technology we use, probably including like you and I talking on Zoom right now, like the early stages of that, all developed in Israel.
And I'm not telling any secrets that people don't know. When Israel gets aircraft from the United States, it then improves the avionics and gives it back to the United States. And the next generation of planes that get made in the United States are better because of that cooperation, and anti-missile missiles are better because of that cooperation. Israel doesn't just have Iron Dome, it has David Sling, which is now a joint, project of the United States and Israel, and will benefit the United States. The United States is vulnerable to long-range missiles as well, and that shield that protects Israel is going to protect the United States as well, and it's a joint effort. But I think more than anything right now, what we need is you would think the easiest, simplest moral clarity in the world, which is for the West to, as one, say, we can't tolerate that level of barbarism, as we did with ISIS, to exist in the world. We just simply can't tolerate it because it will come to get us as Americans. It will come to our back door. We have too porous a border. We have too many people who hate us. We have too many people. I will tell you what is frightening. We have too many people who are looking at what was done in Israel, saying, wouldn't it be great to do that in the United States as well? So as Americans, we better pray that Israel finishes the job, which it will, against Hamas, because otherwise we'll see Kfar Aza and Be'eri and everything along the Gaza border happen in this country sooner or later. It starts with Israel. The suicide bombings start with Israel and they end up at 9/11. That's the trajectory.
Well, I know you're always working on something. Like I said last time, it was, or the first time we spoke, it was the fiction series. You were working on movies. I remember last time we spoke, I believe with Kevin Sorbo. What are you up to now? Anything that people should check out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't want to use this to plug anything. I just did a film with Kevin Sorbo and John Ratzenberger and Lou Gossett Jr. That's October 29th. Is a Fathom event in the United States. I think we're in about 1,000 theaters. It's a very sweet little movie called Miracle in East Texas. After that, I have another movie coming out about the Holocaust. It takes place in the Holocaust, about an incredible woman named Irena Gut, who was a 20-year-old Polish Catholic girl who wound up saving 12 Jews by hiding them in the basement of a German major without his knowledge. And then when he found out about it, she became his mistress in order to save them. I knew her. She became like a second mother to me in the last part of her life, and I loved her dearly and promised her that I would get her story out. That premiered at the Toronto Film Festival, and that'll be in theaters probably after January, somewhere around there, January, February. It's going to be screened at the Museum of Tolerance, oddly enough, on November 9th, which is the anniversary of Kristallnacht in LA, and it's more relevant than ever. And then I'm just finished doing a really neat movie called The Love Ladies, which is about an incredible center in Birmingham, Alabama, started by an amazing woman named Brenda Lovelady Spahn, who has the largest, she doesn't call it a halfway house, it's a whole way house. 20,000 women have gone through it now, and their recidivism rate is less than 8%. They have the highest in the entire world. They have a 93% success rate. And it's an amazing inspirational story of her friendship. She was a white Southern lady from Birmingham, Alabama, who became absolute sisters with a Black convict named Shay. And they became Brenda and Shay became this unbeatable Batman and Robin team. And together they Lovelady House. And Brenda taught Shay Jesus, and Shay taught Brenda Street. And that was a pretty unbeatable combination. So I just finished that screenplay, and hopefully that'll move forward as well.
Do you ever plan on stopping anything? I don't see you ever retiring. I feel like I feel like you're just going to continue writing in some capacity.
You know, English is my first language. What was that word you said?
Retiring.
Tires, retread tires. Was that it?
I don't think that's in the cards for you, right?
No. When you're a writer, you don't get to retire unless you get senile, and then you probably just drool while you sit there on the computer.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm glad we could smile about that stuff that you're working on. I know that this is a horrific situation. I know it hits close to home for you because you really call Israel and the United States home. But yeah, you are always the guy I'm going to call first whenever anything like this is going on, because I know you're going to give it to us straight about what's going on.
Yeah, and I would love to do a more in-depth thing just on the military aspect of it, because it's going to be a very tough campaign. It's going to remind American veterans of house-to-house and door-to-door combat in urban environments. That is obviously more than challenging. It's the most miserable kind of combat there is. And it's going to be complex and a bloody and hard slog. You know, and to paraphrase Churchill, we're not anywhere near the end. We're not anywhere near the beginning of the end, but we are at the end of the beginning. And I guarantee you that when we go in, as we will, Hamas will not be celebrating, they'll be hiding.
Yeah. Well, when we do a more in-depth interview, I think you and Chris would have a lot to talk about as well, not just militarily, but even just the Hollywood stuff. I know I told you on text, if you saw Michael Bay's 13 Hours, Chris Tanto Paranto, so he was the inspiration for Pablo Schreiber's character. I don't know if you were a fan of 13 Hours or if you know Michael Bay, but you know, Chris got to advise on that movie as well, so he's definitely has respect for what you do too.
Yeah, well, it's mutual, so there we are.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate your audience. They all feel like brothers in arms.
All right, guys, so I hope you enjoyed that first segment with Dan Gordon. I mean, I shouldn't say enjoyed because we're talking about such a brutal attack on Israel, but I at least felt informed by it. I'd love to have Dan back on for a more in-depth segment, because beyond just being in the IDF, beyond his knowledge about Israel, he's one of the greatest Hollywood film writers of all time, great novel writer as well. That's really how I got acclimated with him. So I'm sure we'll have him back at some point. Before we get into the interview with Kirk Lippold, Now you can have the superpower to see in the dark with the Viper Binocular Night Vision System by Photonis Defense, which is the global leader in night vision solutions, providing more high-quality night vision capabilities than anyone. Military, law enforcement, and public safety end users utilize Photonis Defense solutions to give them the edge at night in tactical situations and rescue operations. Hunters, shooters, boaters, and enthusiasts can rely on the Photonis Defense Viper Binocular to become masters of darkness. The new Viper Binocular system carries the same features and benefits as the Photonis Defense Viper Binocular, with a ruggedized body, and harnesses the power of the Echo Intensifier tubes, giving you sharper images, reduced halo, and industry-leading ultra-fast auto-gating across the range of dynamic operating conditions. And I will probably be at SHOT Show in January, and we'll be hanging out at the Photonis booth with the crew there, with Phil Otto and with Dale Sizemore, and I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, the night vision speaks for itself. And if you are law enforcement, military, any of that goes out and actually fights the evil that people don't think exists out there, give your guys the best night vision so they come home. And that's Photonis Defense. And then also just getting to meet Phil, you'll see how genuinely nice he is. And he is an operator. He's got the pedigree to go back with his humility and his just genuineness. But just the company in itself, they want to give you the best product to bring people home, not just sell it to you. They want you to have what's out there so your team comes home at night and everybody goes back to their family once the operation's over. So get with Photonis Defense, take a look at them, get best night vision in the US, if not the world. And then, yeah, if you have a chance at SHOT Show, go see Ian. And when you meet Phil, Farmer Phil, and he is a farmer in his off time, and you get to know Phil and you'll just see how great that company is inside and out.
Yeah, this audience is very familiar with Phil, because still to this day, his first appearance on the show is one of our top 10 most streamed episodes. So
Farmer Phil's this? No way. Seriously?
Absolutely. Yeah, he's in our top 10 most streamed episodes.
That's awesome.
So it's photonisdefense.com for more information, or look for Photonis Defense product options from your night vision dealer. Once again, that's photonisdefense.com. Also, of course, as every episode, Fort Scott Munitions is a sponsor. They are a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC spun ammunition. It's designed to tumble upon impact in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammunition was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammunition being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that it receive the same results with each pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in all 50 states, but you can just go to FSM.com. You'll use our promo code and you get 15% off. So that's the best deal right there. FSM.com, promo code BattleLine for 15% off. Fort Scott Munitions is a proud supporter of Chris Peranto, BattleLine Tactical, and the BattleLine podcast. Once again, guys, simple as this, FSM.com, promo code BattleLine. With that, let's get right over to Kirk Lippold. BattleLine podcast. I'm not going to say the switch is on, because for those of you guys listening from the top, we had Dan Gordon top a show, which Chris wasn't able to join me for. But now we have someone that we wanted to have on, basically because, as you're seeing, this episode is up early, and that's because October 12th is the anniversary of the USS Cole attack of 2000. This is 23 years since that date. So joining us is the Commanding Naval Officer of the USS Cole, Kirk Lippold. And the first thing I was going to say, actually, before you show your magic that you've been teasing out, is that this is the most conversational podcast on the planet. I know that, you know, you're a regular on Fox News. I don't know if you're a paid contributor, but we are so much more laid back than any of that. And you could say whatever you want on here and be as candid as you want.
No, we're good. And thank you for having me on today, Chris. Really enjoy it. And I just am really looking forward to it, especially with an opportunity to honor not only my sailors that were killed in the attack, but those that saved the ship as well, the true heroes in this event.
They are. And it's good. I just can't believe we haven't had you on earlier, brother. You and I have been with Keppler Speakers Bureau together for what, 6 years, 5 years, something like that, off and on.
Been a while,
and
but that wasn't the first time we
yeah.
got a chance to meet each other and kind of
No.
together. So
Yeah, it has. So I just, it's like one of those things where like, why haven't I had Kirk on? I'm an idiot. Let's get his ass on. Let's get his ass on the podcast and have him talk. Because and also the tie-in, with AQI and also that same time frame, terrorism was on the run, right? It wasn't supposed to happen. And here they are. They're hitting big targets. But we'll get into that. Yeah. I want to see your magic. What have we been waiting for? The last 5 minutes are going to see this.
One of the things I wanted to be able to do as we were talking is that first and foremost is that for all your viewers out there, I have that ability. So this is the USS Cole crest itself. And just to give everyone an idea, that is the USS Cole, an Aegis guided missile destroyer out there. So I can easily go between some pictures that I'll be able to show, and then also be able to cut back to me as we're walking you through the event and everything that happened 23 years ago this Thursday.
And Kirk was worried that Chris was going to be like, no, don't do this during the interview. I didn't want him to read it.
Why the heck? Of course I watch it. And honestly, I got you. Where is that? Hold on a second. I know it's there. Hold on.
Chris also doesn't know that, quite honestly, his video quality today is so bad that it's going to look.
Gotta have it.
There we go. I do see it though. Yes.
Shameless promo. And this is
front
a
burner
Al-Qaeda's
attack
I have
on the USS Cole, which was your book from several years ago. Yeah,
it was.
And here we go. Look at all that.
It was somewhat interesting because right after the event in 2000, a lot of people encouraged me, hey, you need to retire, write a book, get on the speaking circuit, and you'll make $1 million. And I just kind of looked at them and said that just doesn't happen with nonfiction books. But I think more importantly for me, I was no more ready to relive that event onto paper than fly to the moon. And it literally took my serving for another 6.5 years, retiring in June 2007, and even then a 3 more years after that, before I was finally ready and willing to isolate myself, sit at a keyboard and start typing and recreate that event to what became Front Burner.
And no, it's excellently done. And we're at a time frame too, during the global war on terror. Now guys are writing books left and right. Hey, I'm one of those. I get it. But back then there really wasn't a lot of stuff. Wasn't really going out. I mean, your book came out, we had Black Hawk Down from before, but other than that, was Lone Survivor before? I can't remember if Lone Survivor was before or not. Marcus's book.
That was post 9/11 with Marcus.
Yeah, that was post 9/11.
Yep.
Yeah. So I honestly, that it wasn't something that guys usually did, and you still had time on your service. So you were going to finish out from what I understand. I mean, I was a young buck then. I don't know. How was I in my 30s at that time? I'm not saying you're old, Kirk. Not at all. You still look good, dude. You're not.
No, I looked at it as when I was done, I saw a wonderful opportunity and said, what happened to you was unique. And while I could have put it in a box, I said, no, I still want to continue to serve my nation. It was rather interesting. I was on the ship after it had been brought back to the United States and put up on the blocks to be rebuilt. Mm-hmm. When a 4-star admiral in charge of our Atlantic fleet, Admiral Natter, came down, and I walked him and his entourage of about 10 people around the ship. And at the end, it was kind of funny. He pulls me aside and says, well, what do you want to do next? And I kind of chuckled because there was still a big investigation going on at the time. And I said, Admiral, I don't even know if I have a next yet. And he kind of looked at staff and said, "Can you give us a minute alone?" And of course, when a 4-star says that, everyone scurries away at the speed of heat. And then he said, absolutely, investigation's going to be fine. You're going to come out of it fine. There are going to be people happy, people unhappy, which means I'm getting the right notes. What do you want to do next? And I said, I want a heavy lift job. And that's how I ended up on the Joint Chiefs of Staff working strategy and policy right on the cusp of 9/11.
Sure. I didn't know the investigation. I mean, I'm assuming there always is. And because I'm going to forget to ask this before we start getting into what happened. And I want you just to take the microphone and give the story. Tell me the story. But why was the investigation just to say that see if you were at fault? Why would there be an investigation? Or was it just, is that just formality? They just, hey, we just got to make sure.
It's normal. I mean, 17 sailors were killed and 37
Sure.
wounded. And the American people, and especially those families that lost loved ones, deserve to have some hard questions asked of me, of the crew, and of the chain of command to determine, okay, how did this happen? How did this ship come to be in that port? What security measures were and were not followed, and why? Because those families needed to know that everything that could have been done had been done,
Sure.
and that there was no way to stop that suicide attack. And I'll get into those kind of details in a minute.
Yep.
But they deserve to have that investigation. And I applaud the Navy for doing it. However, I will also say that the investigation in and of itself fell short, and it didn't ask some of the probing questions, what I consider to be up the chain of command, instead of just at the commanding officer and down the chain of command.
I'm with you on that. I know how that goes as well. You and I are kind of in that same boat there. I know, unless Ian's got something, I really, Kurt, for this podcast, I just want to turn it over to you and just, hey, walk through it. Just go through what happened, kind of like a speaking event. Hey, sure. What happened? But Ian, what do you want to do, bud? It's your show.
No,
too.
I agree. I would love to hear. I mean, actually, I think the thing that people may be wondering with your military career, as Chris said, we have plenty of special ops guys on from the 90s, and people always talk about 90s Rangers, 90s SEALs. A lot of those guys never saw combat. Did you see anything significant prior to this happening?
As a matter of fact, I did. I came out of Carson High School in 1977 and went straight into the Naval Academy, 4 years there, graduated in 1981. I chose what was called surface warfare as my specialty, so to speak. And so my first ship was a tank landing ship. We were supporting the Marines. I was on the ship for about a year before we would deploy. And when we deployed, we were supporting the Marine Artillery Battery above the Beirut airport. At that time, we were doing the multinational peacekeeping force in Beirut. Israel had invaded the country, and they were kind of sitting in the middle. So you literally had Beirut in the middle, or Lebanon in the middle of a major civil war between Muslims, Christians, Jews. It was crazy. But I had an opportunity while I was there to actually get a tour downtown by the Marines. We went into the embassy, exchanged money. We went and saw the Green Zone. We went and saw Juni. Absolutely beautiful country. 5 days after I was there, a car suicide bomber blew the front face of the embassy off. If I had been standing in the office exchanging money that morning, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. Wow. So that was really my first taste. Second one came when I was on board an Aegis guided missile cruiser for my second tour. And that's when we spent Christmas in 1985 at Naples, Italy. We have a big Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean there. That's where a lot of ships would go. A couple of our chief petty officers, E7s, were up at the Rome airport picking their wives up who'd flown over for some vacation time with them. That's when the terrorist attacks in the Rome airport actually occurred. They heard the grenades going off. They heard the machine gun fire, grabbed their wives out of there into a car, and they just said, just get out of here. And the cab driver knew it was serious and left. So that would also begin that Gaddafi in Libya, claiming his infamous line of death for the entire Gulf of Sidra. We would be coordinating all the anti-air warfare over the entire Gulf itself. I actually called in some of the first missile strikes onto the radar sites when we were operating there. So there were a number of things that I saw and did. We operated up in the Black Sea. We went freedom of navigation operations about 6.5 miles off Sevastopol when that was the days of the big bad Soviet Union. So we were up close and doing those kinds of things with enemies at the time, or, they were far beyond adversary. As the Soviets, we were at the, pretty much toe to toe through that entire 1980 time period. So being exposed to that stuff really helped shape my approach, that when the peace dividend broke out in 1993, well, I had just finished commissioning as the commissioning operations officer of the Navy's first Aegis guided missile destroyer. That's the one I showed you a little bit ago right here, where you see the ship itself. absolutely phenomenal combat ships, well made, able to take a hit, as you will see as we go through this this podcast. But I'll tell you right now, everyone started lowering their guard. And so by the time it came for me to take command of USS Cole in June of 1999, I was kind of that mindset where I had been shaped by the Soviet Union. I wanted to make sure my crew was ready. So I was already taking over a great ship on the waterfront with a very talented crew, but they were kind of at that point where they had become so good, they were now resting on their laurels a little bit. And so my job, I began to raise the bar. And I began to set standards for them. I began to push them. I began to demand more of them. And, there was a lot of, show me a soldier and a sailor that doesn't complain when the bar gets raised. I can tell you, Chris, as well as I do. But they were kind of looking at it as, why are we having to do this? Because when I was pushing them to learn systems and go one step beyond, what I was really demanding is saying, look, I know the depth of talent you guys are capable of. I had made a decision about 6 months prior to deployment. Cole had just started getting women on board the ship, and I rearranged it. And so I ended up, when I deployed about a year after I took command, USS Cole, we had one 36-person berthing compartment for the women. I opened up another 24-person berthing compartment. We deployed with about 35% more women than any other ship had done. And, I consider myself extremely lucky. I mean, I stood at the very back end of USS Cole and said the 3 greatest words of a naval officer's career: I relieve you. And it really was with those simple words that I assumed total accountability for that $1+ billion national asset and the lives of almost 300 of our nation's finest sailors. We went training, and the day before we deployed, this picture was actually taken. You can see the crew in their dress uniforms. They're in the position in that picture where they're actually doing what's called manning the rail. All of my officers and chief petty officers were down on the pier. Well, the next day when USS Cole would get underway for deployment, and we actually pulled away from the pier in Norfolk, I achieved something on that ship that had never been done before in the Navy, and it's never been repeated since. As we got our ship underway, every single one of my officers manned the rail. Who got that ship underway? A 100% qualified enlisted crew. Now, Chris, you'll get this. A lot of them kind of looked at it and said, well, that's real nice. The old man's got a nice check in the block for his next promotion. Good for him.
I mean, I think so. Like, well, he's doing something. What's he getting out of this? He's showing off. He's showing off, man. But really
he had a front page Navy Times article. I mean, it was great. I also looked at it as, the crew kind of said, hey, I've missed my kids' soccer games, ballet recitals.
Yeah.
I didn't get the honeydew list done at home on duty days. I'm not only working all day, then standing a watch. I'm not getting a chance to go play Game Boy or watch a movie. I'm tracing systems. But what that did give the crew was 2 months later, when we pulled into Aden and we were attacked and almost 20% of the crew was killed and injured, they had the confidence to literally step into those vacant positions when they showed up at their general quarters station and do what was necessary to save that ship and save their shipmates. So you can't ask for any better than that.
And we say that, and I know you train you guys like that. I think when we speak sort of the same. Hey, you don't rise to the level you need to, unless you've been trained to this level. You're going to rise to your highest level of training, but you're not going to rise above it unless you've rise up here. You don't just reach it on your own. So you're teaching your guys, and guys is a gender neutral term on the show. We always say that, Kirk, just so you know, we mean both men and women. That to learn, and as special ops guys goes to learn the person 3 above you and 3 below you, learn their responsibilities as far as 3 guys that are ahead of you and 3 people that are below you. So if somebody does die, you can take over their job. So a specialist can take on the E6's job if he has to, and vice versa. A private can take on the E5's job if they have to. And I'm assuming from what you're saying, that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm saying. You're training them. So if somebody goes down, doesn't matter if they're NCO or not, and you're an E2, you've got to take over that helm. And obviously, well, we'll get into that. Obviously it worked.
It absolutely worked. And I couldn't be prouder of them. And there's going to be one particular point that will really bring that to the fore as in the aftermath of the attack itself. But we would end up crossing the Atlantic, and we would go into the Mediterranean itself. We operated there for 4 weeks, and as I like to say, we suffered miserably for 4 weeks. We suffered through Barcelona, Spain, Villafranche, France, Valletta, Malta, Koper, Slovenia. Hey, you special operators and the Army guys, I get it. Navy still has the best tagline. You join the Navy, you're going to see the world. They saw bullfights. They saw the Eiffel Tower. They saw the Louvre. They saw St. Paul's Shipwreck Cathedral. They even went up and over the border from Koper, Slovenia to Venice, Italy, and took gondola rides and walked around St. Mark's Square. But eventually, our drill job was in the Middle East, and we would come down. We would go across the Eastern Mediterranean. We'd go through the Suez Canal on the 9th of October. We would go down the Red Sea through the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. And literally at around 2:30 in the morning, I'm off that little port called Aden, Yemen. It's at the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula. We had gone from a Navy of 4,000 ships in World War II to a Navy just shy of 600 ships at the height of the Reagan buildup in the mid-1980s. To that morning, there were only 315 ships in the Navy. There was only one oiler in the Middle East where we could do underway replenishment of the ship. So we had to find a way to pull into port. And when you look at where that port actually sits at that southwest corner, it's also, if you notice, about the halfway point between the European theater of operations and the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean and the Central Command area of operations and Fifth Fleet, which is just around the corner. So there was really no place that we could get fuel. The oiler was 1,000 miles away. Aden sat at the halfway point. And when you really look at it, the port itself, we would go in with a couple of tugs meeting us. We would go into the port, make a series of right-hand turns. And then the next thing would happen is I would turn the ship around and we would moor it starboard side or right side of the pier in the middle of the harbor. We shut down the 4 main engines. We left 2 of our 3 gas turbine generators, providing 2,500 kilowatts each, providing power to the ship. And then we began the import refueling checklist. We were below 50% fuel. Ship like USS Cole carries a little over 500,000 gallons of fuel. We knew we were going to be there taking on 250,000 plus gallons. I had been in touch with another CO who had been in there a few weeks before us. And he said, hey, you can expect a refueling rate of around 300 to 500 gallons a minute. Okay, do the quick math. We were going to be there 6 to 8 hours taking on fuel. So the sooner I get started, the sooner I can finish. And for me, time was everything because I wanted to get the ship back out to sea because that's where Navy ships feel safe.
Was there a threat level there at that time, like a known or unknown? There always is a threat level in those areas. I know. I worked in Sana'a, Yemen after Benghazi, and also floated those things fighting pirates. I wasn't lucky enough to be on a frigate like yours, though. I was on a dang commercial ship living on a container box on the deck. Yeah, sleeping it. But I know that area very, very, very well because we float through the Red Sea and then we'd go that way and go around the Arabian Peninsula, or we go down to Cape Town in front of Somalia. But Yemen, did you have a kind of like we did? 2 days prior, we had a BOLO alert that said, "Hey, an embassy, something is going to be attacked." But yeah, we always get that, and I know you do too. It's like, well, yeah, we're always going to get attacked everywhere we go. Because we're the biggest target. So, but did you have something where the hair on the back of your neck stood up, kind of the tingles, like, man, we really need to get the heck out of here?
We actually did not. We had been operating in the Mediterranean, and back then they were called threat conditions. Now they're conditions. And while I was in the Mediterranean, I was asked to submit my force protection plan. So of course, like you, I'm a lean forward type A kind of guy.
Sure.
So I said, hey, I'm going to do all 63 measures. And it went from me in the Mediterranean to the 1-star aircraft carrier battle group commander that was now operating in the Middle East. He approved it. Then it went to the 5th Fleet commander, the 3-star admiral. He approved it. So then I go through, and as you'll notice, when you go back and you look at that picture itself, we're at a pier out in the middle of the harbor. My force protection plan said, I'm going to do all 63 measures. Well, guess what? Half the security measures didn't even apply to those geographic circumstances, and yet it had been rubber stamped. Why?
Yeah.
Because the Navy was kind of viewing force protection as more of an administrative drill than an actual procedure that had a process to it, that had equipment, that had training, that was actually going to keep a ship safe. So we were out in the middle of that harbor. When we went into Aden, we were now in Fifth Fleet. Threat condition stepped up from Alpha and Alpha Plus to threat condition Bravo. That means that there is a higher possibility that you may have an attack. But there was no specific intelligence. And what we didn't know that morning is that Al-Qaeda had been in that port for about a year, observing when Navy ships pull in, what pier they went to, what side they moored to, what boats came out. And they took advantage of it.
A year. I didn't know that. That's not shocking by any means, but still, you would think. I don't want to get into that. You would think that the intel, but military intelligence and intelligence in general, it's a contradiction in terms. It's been that way. Where that's what was said back in Vietnam, and I think it still has some accuracy.
I think we're going to say it's said by Megadeth. You know that Megadeth line,
Yeah,
military
Megadeth. Yeah, the
two words
Megadeth.
combined that can't make sense.
Well, let's, because of time, I want to get through. Let's start, if we could. What was that morning like? What was the morning of the attack like? How was things going? Because you really have set up the stage where, hey, we did everything we were supposed to do. We did. But I feel the rubber stamp into the force protection. The force protection was with us was still, even in 2012, was still being rubber stamped because they wouldn't give us what we needed, or the State Department guys. So really, that hasn't changed much since what happened to you. It still goes up to bureaucrats in DC, and they just it's if they get attacked, who gives? It's almost like, who gives a shit? If they get attacked, who cares? And I know that's not how it is with all of them, but you get that feeling when you get the rubber stamp and you're putting all the effort into it, and you know what you need to protect yourself and protect others, but you're not getting what you need. But regardless, you did what you did. You took care of business. So that morning you get up. What happened?
Okay, so that morning, about 8:30 in the morning, is when we actually proceeded into the port, turned around the ship, moored it. We were moored with the 4 main engines powering the 2 shafts and the 2 generators running by about 9:30 that morning. We began the import refueling checklist. My main propulsion assistant. So, on a Navy ship, you've got a captain, an executive officer, and then a series of department heads, operations, combat systems, weapons supply, and under the engineer is that main propulsion assistant. That's the person responsible for all those engines, generators, but also the fuel and lubricants on board. He brings the checklist up. I go through it. He asked me to speed up and just sign it off at the bottom. I said, no, I'm going to wait till the chief engineer's done with her backup checks. Being a good 13-year prior enlisted sailor, limited duty officer, when he came to me, as he took the checklist and was walking out of the cabin, of course, he's, as I would put it, expressing his complete and total satisfaction with my logic. But it was also the last time I'd see him alive. And at about 10:30, chief engineer came up, signed off. A few minutes later, the executive officer came up with the supply officer. One thing we had not asked the embassy for was for garbage barges. They arranged for 3 of them to come out to the ship to take off trash, plastic, hazmat, routine harbor operations. So that was ongoing as well. And I turned back and was sitting at my desk doing what you always do, that routine paperwork that always seems to justify your job. And as I was sitting at my desk at 11:18 that morning, there was a thunderous explosion. You could feel all 505 feet and 8,400 tons of guided missile destroyer suddenly and violently thrust up into the right. The ship seemed to almost hang for a second in the air before it slid back down in the water, rocking from side to side, surging fore and aft on the mooring lines. Fortunately, none of them parted next to the pier. And then power failed, lights went out, ceiling tiles had popped out. I had come up in the brace position, grabbing the underside of my desk as everything popped up about a foot, slammed back down. And then I went to the door of my cabin. I looked down the passageway in the dark. There was one emergency light by my door, one halfway down the passageway, and this gray cloud comes toward me, silently washes over me. I could smell the dust. I could smell the fuel, but there was also this acrid metallic tang that settled in the back of my mouth, and I didn't know what it was. Young officer living in the stateroom behind mine comes out, grabs the door jamb, looks at me wide-eyed, using good sailor-like language, asked me, what the F was that?
Which you could say on here, by the way. You could drop an F-bomb on here.
He said, he did. He said, what the fuck is that? And then without saying one more word, he goes, fuel. And then what does he do, Chris? The same thing we're trained to do. He headed into that gray cloud toward the danger to find out what was going on.
You know what I wanted to ask you? I'm sorry, because I
That's
know you're in
awesome.
the middle of this, but this reminds me almost of when I heard Dakota Meyer when I got to interview him, and he talked about what the event that he received the Medal of Honor for. And I asked him, did you fear that you were going to die? And he said, I didn't fear I knew I was going to die. Did you feel that way in that moment, seeing what was, I mean, there's nowhere to run. You're on this ship. Did you feel like this is it? My life is over. Did you see your life flash before your eyes?
Hold that question.
Sure. Yeah.
Because as I took that one step out, I suddenly stopped and I knew we'd been attacked. Because if you remember, going back to the ship, we're moored starboard side. If it had been a fuel explosion on the ship or the pier, I would have been blown left. But I had been thrust right and up toward the pier itself. So I knew instinctively something had come alongside and exploded. So I went back into my cabin, back to the bedroom area in the dark. There's one emergency light shining down on the safe where I kept all the keys to the weapon systems on board the ship. Missiles, torpedoes, 5-inch gun. I dialed it open, reached in. I don't grab a handful of keys. I brought a personal weapon with me, 6 Sauer, 229, 9mm, 3 clips of ammunition, fully loaded. I grabbed it, loaded it, chambered around, decocked it, 2 clips of ammunition into my pocket, out of my cabin, down one deck, ran down the starboard side to about the middle of the ship. And I'm in a semi-enclosed area looking toward the back end of USS Cole, and no one is around. The 3-person watch team that was there, keeping an eye on the refueling workers down on the pier, gone. A wooden podium that used to be there had been blown into pieces and is scattered across the deck. Wires that used to form our high-frequency radio antenna are snapped off and draped down, and this dirty black water is dripping off of everything. I don't know if we're going to be boarded. I don't know if there's going to be a follow-on attack. I know I need to get to the port side. I took that deep breath, and all I could think to myself was, well, this is going to be your destiny. But guess what? If you roll out and you see someone that doesn't belong, make them duck first. Don't leave an empty round in the chamber. And if this is the end, at least you went down fighting for your ship.
That's awesome. Because Ian asked me that, and I was like, no, I really wasn't worried about dying. It's like I just needed to go. Let's just go get it done. And the only time, yes, it's especially in the beginning, or when everything's going, the adrenaline's going, you're going a little bit crazy because things are just happening so fast. The training kicks in; it always does. That's not like a stereotypical response. It's the truth. The training kicks in, but it's that running towards it. It's the, hey, let's go. It's game time. That's why. That's what it sounds like with you. It's like, hey, it's game time. If this is it, but no need to worry about it now. Let's just go take care of business. And it sounds like that's what was going on through your head, and that's what you were doing. It sounds like your crew is doing the same thing from what you've said so far.
Sure. And we'll touch on that in a minute, because as I roll out, first person I see isn't a terrorist. It's my chief gunner's mate, reestablishing the defensive perimeter around the ship with the security teams. He starts worrying about me, literally puts his hand in my chest and tells me, Captain, get down, get back, stop pointing at things, tuck your collar devices in, take your khaki belt off. You're making yourself a sniper target. And I'm like, that isn't how these guys operate. The bomb's gone off. They're out. They're long gone. But I leaned over the side of the ship, and it confirmed my worst fears, because all the metal on the side of the ship is shoved inward. You could see the spray pattern of explosive residue, the entire left side of the ship. You could tell that the explosion had literally dented almost every piece of metal in the superstructure. And then alongside the ship, I've got 4 orange rafts. And the first thing that went through my mind was, how did someone let these rafts get alongside the ship? The first one blew up, and that's what put the hole in the side. The next 2 were peppered with shrapnel, and the detonator's locked loose. But the one that's by the flight deck, if that goes off, I'll be in big trouble, because it's fully inflated, still full of explosives, and it'll take out the 2 screws that propel the ship, the 2 rudders that steer it. There'll be no way I can get USS Cole underway.
So what brought him up? How did that happen? If you don't mind me cutting you in, I'm sorry, Kirk, but how did they get there?
What ended up happening? Great question. It always comes up because everyone's wondering, well, how did they get there? One of the security team members came running up to me because we were shoving the crew back inside the ship because we didn't know the security situation. And he's like, Captain, sir, those rafts aren't the problem. The 2 garbage barges came out, one at the middle of the ship, one by the flight deck, We loaded them up with all the trash, plastic, and hazmat. They left for halfway across the harbor when a boat came, slowed by the bow, turned, came down the side of the ship. Contrary to what you read in a lot of news reports, it was not a Zodiac boat that raced across the harbor and rammed the side of the ship and detonated. No, this was a boat that Al-Qaeda, after observing the garbage barges going out to almost every Navy ship that came in, looked exactly like the garbage barges. 24-foot, fiberglass, center console, outboard motor, 2 guys in it. They even stood and waved to a young fireman that was my overboard discharge watch to make sure I didn't spill fuel. He looked at it and said, something's not right. Next thing he knew, he's flat on his back with a face full of shrapnel and survived. And when the FBI and NCIS interviewed him, what he had actually thought to himself as the boat went by with those 2 guys in it was, boy, that sure is awful clean for a garbage barge.
What do you do? Your rules of engagement.
Yeah.
You can't shoot it.
I'm in peacetime rules of engagement. I didn't even have supplementary measures authorized. So it would have had to have exhibited hostile intent like aim a gun or hostile act like shoot a gun. So everyone asked, how did you let it get inside the perimeter? It looked like a garbage barge. I'm in peacetime rules of engagement.
Yeah.
And when it came down the side of the ship, it came to the middle. And it was something the Navy never anticipated or trained for. A waterborne improvised explosive device with 2 suicide bombers that blew that hole in the side of the ship.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Ansar Sharia, or Falasahate, which now they're both ISIS. I always tell that I don't like them. I think they're scumbags, but I do respect the way they fight. I do, because they do their due diligence. Like you said, they did their military intelligence. They did their collection. They knew how to hit you, and they did exactly follow your rules of engagement, which they followed even our rules of engagement that night, which was a don't shoot until you get shot at, and they know how to blend. They just blend perfectly in. They're excellent at unconventional warfare. And, yours was one of the first ways for us to start to find out how good they were. I just don't think the uppers ever learned from that. The guys on the ground did, especially if you've been hit before, but the uppers just never fucking could learn from it. They just didn't want to. I don't know.
Chris, look at it. We as a nation weren't ready to do what we needed to do to go after terrorists. We had already been through World Trade Center 1 in 93, Khobar Towers 96, the African bombings in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Nairobi, Kenya in 98.
Yeah, remember that.
Now USS Cole. And we did nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, because I mean, this is for especially for the younger listeners. This is 11 years shy of 9/11. This was a totally different world. People who are young enough, I mean, I'm old enough, but people in their 20s, they don't remember when buildings didn't have high security, where you didn't get a metal detector every time you went into a large event. I mean, do you feel like in the 90s at that time, and at this time 2000, but just after the 90s, that the Clinton administration in particular, did they really drop the ball entirely on terrorism, as many feel?
Look, when you're in a leadership position, it is your job to be thinking of the things that could happen and not the things that you expect to happen. And I think both everybody across the board, from the intel communities and others, and I know that's everyone's favorite whipping boy when things go south. But at the end of the day, as a nation, we were unwilling to go after what then was truly state sponsors of terrorism and hold them accountable. And unfortunately, we're seeing that play out this last weekend, but we'll touch on that in a bit. Sure. So at this point in time, I went up to inside the ship. I went up in the dark. I got up to the bridge. I contacted the Yemeni Port Authority and asked them for 3 things. Freeze all harbor movements, since we didn't know where the attack had come from. We didn't want any more boats that we wouldn't recognize coming out to us.
And that allows you to up your rules of engagement, though. As soon as you say that, now I can shoot if somebody's coming at us.
Trust me. I'll tell you in a sec about rules of engagement.
I'm sure they went out the window. But you were covered. You're CYA and you're covering your ass. Okay, I got my ass covered now. But I know my guys, I just told them, anything comes to us, you shoot them fucking between the eyes. I know that's what you're telling them, but you're covering your ass on the bureaucratic side. I get it. I get it.
But I'll tell you, Chris, the one thing that I had to remember from the instant the blast went off and I was sitting in my cabin was, as the captain, I just took a deep breath, and you don't look outward. I looked inward, and I told myself, okay, no matter what gets brought to you, no matter how bad it might be, you as the captain, you have to stay absolutely calm. Because if the crew senses for one split second that you are unsure, that you are unwilling to make a decision, that you are panicking, it had spread by orders of magnitude down the chain of command.
It's like a wildfire. It's like throwing gasoline on a fire. Bam.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
When
get
I
it.
walked
I get
up
it.
there,
Yep.
it was okay. Freeze all harbor movements, notify local hospitals. But then I said, send boats out to us, but I want them to make a big arc around the stern of the ship, come to the back of the refueling pier, and we will get the wounded down to you. So, coming around the back of the ship and then to the refueling pier itself, that's how we get the wounded out to us. But I also put a condition on them. I said, you must not come any closer than 100 meters to my port side or I will shoot you. Do you understand? And the Ammonese, while they said, yes, we understand, when the boats started coming out, you might look, I learned a very unique phenomenon. I don't care where you are in the world. When you tell someone something like that, there is no problem with the English language. Okay? Those boats stayed 300 meters away from us. They very gingerly approached. We've broken out every crew served weapon, locked, loaded, and pointed at them. 50 cals, M60s, M79 grenade launchers, M14s, 12-gauge shotguns, 9mm pistols, and if they'd come inside the 100-meter arc, wrenches, hammers, screwdrivers, we were going to do whatever it took to defend the ship. And when you talk about rules of engagement, my operations officer was up there. When we pulled in that 3/4-inch thick book, Secret No Foreign, okay, that has all the chairman, joint chiefs of staff standing rules of engagement, chuck it. ROE, here's the new ROE ops. If a boat comes out to the ship and comes inside that 100-meter arc, you give it one warning on the bullhorn. If it continues to close, you fire one warning shot. And if it continues to close, open up with everything you had and all bear responsibility if it's the wrong boat. We can't afford now another one alongside. So ROE became a very simple 3-step process at that point. Sure. And he got the word out to all the security teams at that point, but we're in trouble because USS Cole at this point is now listing over 5.5 degrees to port and down 1 degree by the bow. We can literally feel the ship sinking beneath our feet.
So it's how do those ships manage it? Is it just you have different ballasts? You have different I don't even know what to call them. I'm not a Navy guy, brother, but where water comes into one, is it called a ballast? Where water comes into one but you can shut it down and then
a ballast tank will normally is what you bring it in if you want to keep the ship level or if you're trying to lower in the water, because as you burn fuel, water fills in behind it. So actually, as you burn fuel, the ship becomes deeper in the draft because water's heavier than fuel. But the way the Navy ship works is every compartment that's on the ship can be bogged down with watertight doors and isolated. One of the things that I've done that morning is I said, okay, on the main deck, the one deck that runs the entire length of the ship, it's called the damage control deck. I said, from that deck to every space below the waterline, I want it compartmented to the maximum extent possible, like we were at general quarters. That served two things when the blast went off. Number one, it prevented cascading flooding throughout the entire bottom of the ship where we would sink. But two, each of those compartments mitigated the force of the blast so that as it penetrated and went through the ship, each of those compartments, in order to be breached, absorbed a significant amount of energy. And that's what ended up saving us.
And that was just, you got lucky? That's what you did? Or like I said, did you did you get in there and like, you know what we need to do? Or is that what you standard did every time you did port in the Arabian Peninsula? Okay, that was your standard.
That's how that's again, how I ran my ship was probably a little bit just differently and a little higher standard than others. Didn't care. I heard the wanking, but right now, all I know is that without thinking about it, that is paying huge dividends for us.
What's it? So it's old school. Rather be safe than sorry. How many times we heard that growing up? That's just old school way of doing things. Let's be safe than sorry. Let's just make sure especially when we're in a area where there is terrorism, where there could be a surprise attack, or even though that was VBIDs or vehicle boat improvised explosives, those were very rare. I mean, it was extremely rare at that time. Who could have thought that would have happened?
Chris, we knew it. We knew what it was because when I was standing in the middle of the ship and began to get pointed out, there was little pieces of boat and bomber all over the top side of USS Cole.
Wow.
Jawbone. We found a tooth embedded in the mooring line. We found pieces of the boat everywhere, all over the top side of the ship.
I've found teeth in drywall, never in mooring lines. I found it in drywall after coming up. It's a surreal experience walking up on a scene where there's been a car bomb or something's gone off, or like you said, a bomb's gone off, and there's pieces, and sometimes there's an entire face that just has come off like a mask, and you can find it on the asphalt. Again, I've never been on the water though where that's happened, so that would be a new experience for me.
It's
But man,
you're for those things that you experience, but you don't have time to think about it right now. I've got to get going. So in the dark, I left the bridge. I went down to my cabin, grabbed a flashlight, started walking toward the back end of Cole on that damaged control deck on the starboard side, opposite from where the blast was. And that's where I got my first piece of good news. Because in the back 1/3 of the ship, there are lights on. So right then and there, if I've got lights on, that means I've got a generator running. That means I can get power to pumps. That means I can save the ship. But I would ended up walking in the mess line, which is the middle passageway there. And I've lost one of my lockers that has damage control equipment. So I'm down 1/3. I walk into medical. Nobody's around, so I don't have medical. I walk onto the mess decks. That's my mass casualty area, because the tables are the perfect width and length to take a wounded sailor, set them up there to do triage to save their lives.
Sure.
It's in the dark. And I ended up walking from there up to the galley area. This is what our galley area would normally look like, where we prepare the crew's meals. Chris, this is what I saw instead. That's the interior of USS
And that's
Cole.
just shredded. Look at that. It looks like aluminum can inside of an aluminum can when you crush it and rip it up. That's
And from
wow. Where were all your corpsmen? Where were all your medical people at that time?
I'll get to that. I'll get to
Okay.
that. Trust me. From here, I turned left and I walked over to that like waist high piece of metal. From the
Mhm.
side of the ship end to that point, it's over 20 feet deep. And
Wait, is that looking outside? Is that an opening in the ship? Are you
outside.
seeing?
That's the hole in the side of the ship right there. So I'm looking out the side of the ship. I can see sunlight. I can hear the water from Maiden Harbor lapping, and then I can smell fuel and lots of it. We estimated that they pumped probably they pumped fuel at about a 2,000 gallon per minute rate, because the rate was much higher than we expected when they first started fueling. And coupled with the cracked fuel tanks, we'd leaked over 60,000 gallons of fuel into Aden Harbor over the next few days. But I'm going to be honest with you, and my apologies as a nation. We're going green. But in that particular moment, I did not pause to fill out the EPA spill report. There's just some things, at a moment like this, that's not what worries me. Because down in that hole, down in what's left of main engine room number 1 where the blast hit, we haven't electrically isolated it yet. And down in all that fuel, I'm seeing flashes of light, and now I'm hearing it.
So you're having a short and something, aren't you?
5 electrical wires dipping in and out of that fuel. I'm thinking, not only have we had a devastating explosion, now I'm going to have a major fire on my hands. I back out, walk through the darkened mess decks, walked out the back end. And that's where you come face to face with the reality as the captain you hope you never see.
Yeah.
On the deck was one of my sailors, very clear from the extent of his injuries that he had not made it. 2 guys are staring in disbelief, and all I did was walk up, look at him, and snap my fingers. Eyes locked on mine. Where's your general quarters station? First one said repair 2 and headed toward the forward end of the ship. The other one says repair 3 headed toward the back end of the ship. And I go, wait, before you go to one of the aft berthing compartments, get a couple blankets. Let's get our shipmate covered, moved out of the way. We're going to need to keep this side of the ship clear for doing damage control. Stepped around the corner. All the wounded had initially been taken outside the ship, but as the captain, not knowing the security situation, I shoved them all back in. The crew, knowing they didn't have a triage area, all the way down the lighted portion of the ship on the starboard side and a passageway that ran side to side at the back end of the ship, all the wounded as far as I could see. 2 to 3 sailors working on everyone trying to stabilize them. Wounds were typical for a blast like this. Broken bone, shrapnel, cuts, scrapes, bruises, shock. As the captain, I would have given anything to talk to him, but I can't, Chris.
No,
they are not my number 1 priority. My number 1 priority has to be to save the ship. because if we can't save the ship, nothing's going to matter.
And I,
Well,
I would
and
imagine,
you-
you know,
Go ahead.
I was just, if I could say, I could imagine with the timeline being everything once again pre 9/11, this is probably the first time that these men had seen their brothers die in front of them.
Absolutely. And
And
they
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, all I was going to say, Chris, is that, you know, as I would later tell admirals and generals when they would ask me, you know, you got to remember this was 2000. How'd the women do? And I'd always had the same answer. I don't know. Because I didn't have men and women aboard my ship. I had sailors. No
That's
one
just
no one
people
went
don't
running
get
down
it.
the ship. No, you know, no one went running down the ship screaming, "Oh my God, the ship's going to sink and we're all going to die." Every single one of those sailors knew what they needed to do. They had divided. Now, when we got hit, another thing that had happened is that the announcing system for the ship was knocked offline, or what we call the 1MC. The battery backup for it failed. The backup system for it failed. No one could tell the crew what had happened, where to go, what to do. They had divided into one of three groups: damage control to save the ship, triage to save their shipmates, or security to stop another attack. I'm watching the triage right now, but I know I've got to find out what's going on. So I step amongst the wounded, rounded the corner, and I walked into the central control station. And when I walked in, to my left, the engineers working with their engineers and the generator, how many pumps we have online and how much spare power we have. To my right, the executive officer working with the damage control assistant. And oh, by the way, we talk about training. That young ensign had been aboard the ship for 2.5 weeks. And you know what he was doing? Exactly what he was trained to do. Grease pencil on a chart, plotting where's the primary damage, where's the secondary damage, what are we doing to get all the systems mechanically and electrically isolated so that we can contain the flooding and keep the ship afloat. And Chris, that's where I say I made the smartest decision of my command tour and kept my mouth shut.
Yep.
The last thing I needed to do would be to walk in and take charge without having full knowledge and context of what was going on.
But I say the same thing. You and I think our speeches, that's why we follow each other, I think, all the time, is I say the same thing when I remember watching Tyrone and Tig, and because all the guys we all were leaders before we came in, and we all were senior guys. And I said, leaders do what leaders do in situations under duress. We shut up and we do our jobs, and that's it. Nobody says, nobody micromanages. And that's where I was going to say, cut in with you when you said you were watching it and you wanted to talk to everybody from somebody who has been a private. And I have, I enlisted before I became an officer. I felt like I needed to do that just to learn how to follow before I could lead.
Right.
I didn't need a commander that needed to talk to me all the time. I just wanted to see that if they were doing their job and they were walking and taking care of business, it gave me confidence. And they didn't need to come over here and say, "Hey, are you okay?" I just needed to see them commanding. I didn't need to see them do anything else but commanding. That's all I wanted to see.
Exactly. I mean, let's face it. At this point in my career, I can be the best division officer, best department head, and best executive officer out there. But if I'm doing their jobs, who's doing mine?
Exactly. And if you're doing their jobs, then obviously you didn't train them well enough. So we're having an issues there. Then you're not a good commander. They've got to be able to do it. I'm getting off subject, but we'll come back to it. And I've been out for a long time. You know, you're still tied in more so than I am with DOD and things, DOD and over there in DC, and you've seen the military more so than I have. Me living in Kansas now, away from everything. Do you see that officers are still like that, or are they more because, you know, hey, the woke generation, hey, the more touchy feely, hey, are you going to be okay? Or are they like the old school guys, or let's say, dude, get your job done. Let's just focus. Let's go. And they continue and they not barking orders, just doing their job. They're commanding. That's what commanders should do.
I fear for our military in all the services, because what I see as the greatest threat, yeah, you can talk woke and DEI, and we could go into that. The biggest thing that I'm seeing today is that we're developing a culture where people are risk averse. And that success in command is defined by nothing bad happening rather than actual achievements of leadership and being out there doing what you need to do to raise the bar, set the standard, raise it again, and make your people do better so that when you turn over, they're going to become the leaders so that I can retire someday and they're going to carry on keeping our nation safe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure today, if I were leading a ship, if I would be allowed to stay in command and wouldn't be accused of creating an adverse command climate and be relieved. That's what worries me, as we've become risk averse. It's not the wokeness. It's not the political correctness. It's the fact that we're risk averse, and it seeps through the chain of command, where you get people who view time in Washington, D.C. as more career enhancing than time out in the field, on the front line, out at sea, leading the finest young men and women this nation can produce.
I got nothing. That's a great answer, because I'm so far away from it all. I've removed myself on purpose away from it all because I don't want to be a part of that at all.
I stay plugged in sometimes to my great frustration and anxiety. But it also gives me an opportunity like this to be able to discuss it with your listeners who understand that we need a military that's better start getting on a war footing, better start getting in a mindset where when these young men and women have bad things happen, they're going to be able to focus and go and do what's necessary to defend themselves and project power around the world.
So I wanted to ask you, I know we'll get into the events of last week, but we're putting this up on October 12th. We're recording this on October 10th. So 2 days from now is going to be 23 years since that event happened. So how do you feel just reflecting on it? Does it feel like 23 years? And do you feel that you made a difference for the better in terms of what we've seen today, in terms of an increase in terrorism and sounding the alarm for a lot of issues that were to come in these 23 years that have passed?
Well, I'm fortunate. I look at how my crew has done since and what they have achieved in many levels, both in and out of the Navy, and I am exceptionally proud of them. One of the ones that I'm particularly proud of is, and this will carry the story a little bit, is going to be my navigator, because when I left the central control station, turning damage control over to the executive officer, I arrive in the middle of the ship. I've got some very seriously wounded folks there. One of them was my senior chief gas turbine technician. He had been the last person evacuated out of the chief's mess. And when they found him, he was on his back looking up saying, "Hey, don't worry about me. I'm fine, but be careful. I think there's body parts around here." And when they got down to him and got all the debris off him, it wasn't body parts. It was a compound fracture to his right leg that was folded up and across the chest with a bullet in his ear. So they reached down and said, "Okay, we're gonna get you out of here, senior, but we gotta straighten your leg out first. And we're gonna do it on the count of 3. Ready? 1, flip." Okay, as I put
that was your senior.
Yeah, typical
Navy chief.
He's ahead of schedule, and gave him a shot of morphine and put the rice red M up there with the number 1. And then at about 30 minutes after the blast, my navigator, a young lieutenant, had been in the Navy just over 4 years, comes down and says, "We're sending wounded ashore. We don't know which hospital they're going to. We don't know the full extent of their injuries. We don't know what their treatment regimen is. I recommend we send someone ashore to track them." "Great idea, Nav. Who do you recommend?" "Sir, I'll volunteer to go." "Fine. As soon as the brow gets down to the pier, you go." That was the end of the conversation. She walked off, said, "Yes, sir," walks off the ship at a little over the hour point when the brow goes down, gets on a boat, takes one of the wounded, goes into the hospitals, tracks who's where, looks at the extent, gets word back out to the ship. We would send 20 blood donors and a handful of petty officers ashore to give blood and track the wounded. A press reporter from Agence Française, French reporter, heard the blast, didn't know what had happened, calls the French embassy in Sanaa. They called Paris, who called Djibouti. They flew a medical evacuation team in that night. They took 11 of my most seriously wounded sailors, fly them to Djibouti. My navigator goes with them. The next day, the Air Force flies 2 medevac aircraft in, one into Aden, one into Djibouti, takes all the wounded initially to Landstuhl, Germany, and then stateside. My navigator, and as a testament to how well the crew did that first day, we evacuated 33 wounded off the ship in 99 minutes. And of those 33, 32 survived. My navigator could have left with the Air Force, come home and track the wounded, and I never questioned her motives. What did she do? The day after they left, she gets on an airplane, flies from Djibouti back into Aden, from the airport comes downtown, checks in with the admiral standing up the joint task force responding to the attack, comes down to the pier, gets on a Yemeni boat, comes across the harbor, walks across the refueling pier up the brow, and reports back aboard for duty on board USS Cole. Now, you can't ask for any better than that from those young officers that are working for me. Now, as a quick aside, and I'll jump ahead, she would then go on after that. She would serve a couple more years in the Navy. She would get out, get her doctorate, and she is now an assistant professor at the Naval Academy teaching the future of our Navy.
Very cool. Very awesome. Before Chris jumps in, I appreciate you giving the credit and the accolades to the men and women that you served with, but I feel like you're so polished here, just from like a personal standpoint. How does it feel 23 years later, just for you?
I'm proud and honored that I still have the opportunity to tell this story. Probably like Chris, I could have very easily taken it when it came time for me to get out, put it in a box, tape it shut, put it up on a shelf, and say, yeah, maybe every couple of years I'll take it down and be willing to talk about it. But when I look back at where our nation went 11 months after the attack on Cole and 9/11 occurred, and in the years since, I said, look, this was such a unique event, different than any other, because all those bombings that I mentioned previously, World Trade Center to the embassies, those were attacks by terrorists that housed and represented U.S. interests around the world. The attack on Cole was an attempt to take away our ability to defend our nation. It was fundamentally different, and it was an act of war. Nothing was done.
Yeah.
And because of that, I felt an obligation when I retired to say, I know something? I not only want to share this event, but I think that business can learn from it. Our entire nation can learn from it. It keeps the memory of what my crew accomplished alive, because it allows us to be able to learn from leadership perspective, from a crisis management, from safety. All those things feed into it. And so every time I walk on stage, I get charged, because I look at it as when I tell the story of my crew, I give back. I honor the legacy of what they accomplished, and I honor those 17 sailors that were killed and 37 that were wounded that fateful morning.
Your story. I feel the same way as being a speaker, and I think that's probably why we all resonate to Keppler on that side as far as is that we tell the story. I don't get angry. I used to a lot. I was very political with my speeches. I think I got manipulated that way, but that was all on me. I let myself do it. But honoring those that sacrificed everything, that is the huge, or honoring those that you serve with, is the importance of being a speaker. I think that's the utmost important right now. And you're right on the business side, under duress, being able to handle situations under duress. And I think that's why corporations do like military personnel that have been through. Well, they like the story. I tell guys, you do have to have a story. There's a story there that they want to see and they want to hear, but it's how did you handle yourself when you shouldn't have been able to handle yourself, and how did you handle others around you? And like I said, your story is amazing, like, because you did, you really epitomized being able to handle yourself under duress.
Well, Chris, that's your story like mine. It's, business wants an inspirational story, but they also want, what are the takeaways? Because like in my case, like in your case, what did you give your crew that allowed them to do what they did in that defining moment? Because I want a piece of it for my people.
Well, I tell corporations, hire veterans. Then that's what you want to get with veterans, and look for them as they come onto your job force, because a lot of them have that background.
And there's you have to also make difficult decisions, because all this happens on Thursday. My navigator comes back a few days later, and we almost lost the ship Saturday night going into Sunday morning, when the only operating generator quit. God loves sailor ingenuity. They figured out a way to take the two portable pumps that fill, the air packs that the firefighters use, and they jury rigged them to the flask for the generator to get that 3,000 PSI high pressure air. And
Wow.
5 minutes after midnight on Sunday morning, we restarted the generator and had power virtually the entire time we're there. But then it became the difficult process. That's when FBI and NCIS came aboard, because you got to remember, we're not in a wartime mindset. I'm living in the middle of a crime scene. So they're there, and we were different because normally, hey, when law enforcement shows up, they do two things: evidence recovery, or evidence collection and recovery of the bodies. But in this case, we had 12 sailors still trapped in the wreckage. And my frame of reference at that point was our history. I said, okay, you've just had a 21st century kamikaze attack. If your grandfathers were able to do what they did in the South Pacific following a kamikaze attack, then your crew can do the same. Yeah, it's going to be ugly. They're going to see some things with those shipmates that have been trapped in the wreckage for 5 days as we begin to locate them and pry them out. But they're going to be able to do it. And God love the FBI. This is where they stepped up and said, Captain, you don't need to do that. Your crew doesn't need to do that. We've got folks here that did Oklahoma City, that did the Bosnia grave excavations. We've got the Tyvek suits, the masks, the filters, the gloves. We will take care. What that allowed me to do was take that middle section of the ship and drape it off. And as each of the sailors got brought up, the only person on that crew that did identifications was me. That was something that I couldn't delegate, and it was something that I could not abdicate. And so I saw every one of those sailors. I knew in every single one of them. And when it was all said and done, they began that long journey home to the families. And I knew that that was what was important for my crew. And we honored them. As each of them came off the ship, 6 of their shipmates would carry that body bag. They would walk it, and it would be draped with an American flag. We'd call the crew to attention. We'd rendered honors till they went down onto the pier. I refused to let them go ashore in the Yemeni boat, and they were carried ashore in a U.S. Navy Zodiac with a Marine escorting them the entire way, because USS Cole is named after Sergeant Darrell Cole, United States Marine Corps, who was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for actions on Iwo Jima the first day we invaded.
I know that. Last thing that I have for you here, because I think the story is amazing. You're getting the Cole. I had some problems when I came home. I did, especially after the movie came out and really things went sideways, because I wasn't ready for all that. What was it like for you and your family, if you can talk about it?
Sure.
When you came home for the next couple of years, how did you change it all? Were you angry or anxiety? You know how the normal stuff that people think happened, did it happen?
All those things factored in. I was very fortunate in that I had a father who was a psychologist. He worked in corrections. As he put it, he worked with the cream of the crap of society. But he also dealt in stress management. And so we get hit on Thursday, and very quickly it became apparent what was happening. And so Saturday morning, I sat down with the crew as a whole. Chain of command became very simple. It was the captain and the crew, very flat for a few days until we got things kind of settled out, and then began to rebuild that chain of command again. But I sat down with them and I told the crew, look, everything that you're experiencing, the anger, the agitation, the nightmares, the anxiety, guess what? It's normal. It is your mind processing through the traumatic event of what has happened to us. We almost lost our ship once. We almost lost it again. We're going to save it. But guess what? Everything that you're experiencing is normal. Okay. But no one is going to get through this by themselves. No one is alone in this journey. We have to have each other's back. We have to watch out for each other. And if someone seems to be getting a little bit off, hey, talk to them. And if you're still not comfortable, get a hold of Doc, because we need to make sure that we're watching each other the entire time. And I think because I tried to normalize all those post-traumatic stress issues. I love the medical community, but a lot of times I'll tell them, I don't believe in post-traumatic stress disorder. Yeah. And when they finish with all their yakking and hubbubbing, I sit and say, okay, now that I've got your attention, did every single person on that ship who experienced that event deal with post-traumatic issues after the event? You bet, me included. But I think because we said those things are normal. And what you have to do is kind of recenter yourself. Some of the crew talks about the event. Most tend not to.
Yeah.
Okay. I blame no one for that. I talk about it because for me, it's that way to keep the memory alive and give back. Others just don't want to deal with it. And I get that. I can't count the number of crew that bought my book and said, Captain, I've got your book, but I haven't read it. And I'm like, you don't need to read it. You experienced it.
Yeah.
Why I wrote that book. So don't worry about ever having to read it. Leave that for your kids to do so that they know what you accomplished in saving that ship.
And it's history. And we still need more, we want to immortalize. We do. I say immortalize, and I'm going to use that term again. We want to immortalize history like this. And
sure,
because I feel that country doesn't want that right now. It's like, well, too bad. We're going to put it in a book or a movie or both. And too bad, it's going to be out there forever. And I really love that, because we're losing World War II and Vietnam guys left and right, but I've got their books and I can read about it. And we got an interview, from Battle of the Stone. He passed away a few months ago, Vincent Speranza. So it's wonderful. And again, with the book, it's wonderful having that out there. And you're a talented individual. You got a gift for it, brother. You got a gift for all this. That's important. And if you're good at it, then put it out there, because it's something that people want to read, not just because it's done well.
And I tried. I mean, when I sat down, like I said, when I first started writing, it was, what I sent to the publisher was 541 pages, and not single space and a half. I'll give a little bit.
Okay. It's like, wow, that's a lot of pages.
But I had to get it all onto paper. Okay. I wanted to have more there than we could use. And then let's dial it back to what would become front burner. And I had a little bit of help crafting it, but then at the end, I was starting to pick up and make a lot of the corrections myself and redoing some of the writing, so that, what you have there it's me. And, the fact that I then about a year later had the opportunity to do the audio version. You can get it on Audible. So if you're driving and you want to listen to Front Burner, you can. It's just
Kirk has a great voice.
Yes, great voice.
So
you can keep going. I was just saying you have a great voice for the audio version.
it was very interesting, because when I first started, now in all honesty, everything on the table here, when I first started, the guy that was mentoring me was a guy named Grover Gardner. He had been specifically selected by Stephen King to read The Stand. So I start to read the book, and he stops me and says, okay, you've proven you can read. You've proven that you've got good diction. That's nice. He said, now I've heard you on stage. I want you to relive that event onto tape. I want to hear the power of the moment in your voice. I want you to describe what you were sensing, what you were feeling, what you were going through, because that all is contained in that book, but I want you to tell it.
That's awesome. And that's what's lost when people have a voice actor like myself sometimes read their audiobooks is, I haven't lived their experience. So I get that. I have one last question about the attack, and then I know we could touch on Hamas.
Then let's get into let's get into what's going on.
But I do have one more question, as I said, about it. Is I just have to wonder, from your perspective, we spoke about 9/11, but 11 months later, after this happens, just like all of us, you watch a plane hit the Tower 1, you watch a plane hit Tower 2, plane hit the Pentagon. I just have to wonder, from your perspective, was there a feeling of truthfully, what the fuck, man? Did they not learn anything from us? How did Intel drop the ball this much?
Okay, so I'm going to rewind the tape for me a little bit. When I came off Cole, the investigation's complete. I go to the Joint Forces Staff College, and then I reported back to the Pentagon for that heavy lift assignment that the Admiral and I discussed. I was on the J5, which is strategy and policy. A previous commanding officer, I'd been his executive officer on a cruiser, had come back to Washington, had retired, and he had gone to work for the CIA. A guy named Charlie Allen is up there. Okay, he was the assistant director for collections. Kind of a low-key title, right? Think about the collections wide that they do. He calls me up and says, hey, Mr. Allen would love to have you come up, and we'd love to share with you what we knew about bin Laden before, during, and after the attack on your ship. Said, great, we fenced a day, hop in the car, drive up, talk to the nice camera, talk to the nice armed guard, get a VIP pass, walk in. It is the movies. The 16-foot granite seal. To my left, the one gold star on the wall for the Office of Strategic Services. To my right, the wall of honor with row after row of those gold stars for the CIA agents that have given their lives, some known, some not. We go up, sit down at 7 o'clock, and I get briefed for over an hour and a half. And at the end, he says, what do you think? And I said, first, Mr. Allen, thank you, but I'm going to be honest. America doesn't understand. I believe it is going to take a seminal event, probably in this country, where hundreds, if not thousands, die before Americans realize we're at war with this guy. He said, well, we're doing our best to make sure that doesn't happen. We got up and left from there to go look at some overhead imagery, some satellite shots of a place called Tarnack Farms and some other areas.
Yeah.
20 minutes after I said that, the first plane hits the North Tower.
Wow. That's incredible.
I was literally standing outside the door to the counterterrorism center to go in and meet Kofor Black when the second plane hit the South Tower, and everyone knew that we were now a nation at war.
So how many F-bombs did you drop when that happened? And how many times did I fucking told, I fucking told you guys, I told you so. I mean, you don't want to do that because you don't feel air, but you're right. Like, I told you, sons of bitches.
All I'm thinking is I've got to get back down to work.
Oh, you get back to your ship.
So I leave the building, hop in my car. I'm driving down the parkway. And to be honest, I'm a mess.
Okay.
I called and talked to someone very dear to me, who's my better half and has been for years. And I was, I failed my nation once and 17 sailors were dead. I failed my nation again, and now we're under attack. What could I have been doing rather than worrying about what I was going to have for my next assignment? As I'm approaching, there's this stone overpass as you're coming up to the Pentagon. And right before that, she says, oh my God, Jim Miklaszewski says the Pentagon's been attacked. I go through that stone arch. As I come on the other side, I can see the black smoke still coming up from the Pentagon. And it was like a wall came down. I said, yep, Pentagon's been hit. Call my folks and tell them I'm okay. I'm going into the building to see what I can do. I'll call you when I can. Bye. Click, hung up. Drove a little bit south, and then I hopped up on what's the main artery going in and out of Washington, 395. And right by the Pentagon is a road called Boundary Channel Drive. Parked my car. Arlington police showed up. Virginia State Highway Patrol showed up, said, you got to leave. I told them who I am and why I was there. Okay, you can stay. 2 times while I'm standing there, these black Suburbans with flashing blue lights would go flying by, slam on the brakes, back up. The windows had come down, and I'd have these guys looking at me saying, what are you doing here? It was FBI agents responding out of the field office and headquarters from downtown that had been with me on Cole and Aden that were looking at how they could get to the Pentagon now to respond to the attack that occurred there.
So did you jump in and get them some directions, or did you just go?
I told them where to go, and I stayed out. And my job actually was the Child Development Center was attached to the Pentagon at that time. Parents were coming in absolutely panicked, but I knew that all children had been evacuated out of there and were across the street in LBJ Park, and that they were perfectly safe. So I had to get the parents calm. So I said, I'm not going to allow you to go down there because we've got people evacuating and we don't need a hood ornament and another accident. It's bad enough as it is. Once they were calm, I'd let them go down and pick up their kids, and they drove home. And guess what? 2 years ago, I learned through a newspaper article, one of those parents that I ran into on Boundary Channel Drive, their daughter is now a midshipman at the Naval Academy. I went into her class and got a chance to meet her.
Wow. That's cool. That's cool. Well, I'll be honest, I got, that was all I got for.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an amazing story.
And
I really hope
forgive me
pick
for
up the book.
Yeah, forgive me for looking up a whole bunch. My little boy's sitting right across there. He's
no, you're good now. And now
he's been such a good boy.
Your video has actually been back for the past few minutes, so because we lost you on video for a little bit, and just had you on audio. We're good now.
Oh, shit.
We're good now. But yeah, so I hope people who are hearing this, learn something from it and hopefully pick up the book, which once again is Front Burner: Al-Qaeda's Attack on the USS Cole.
I'm talking. Look at it right here. I got it right there.
Right there. Pick it up. But so the first segment that I got to do that Chris wasn't on, I spoke to Dan Gordon, who's a sniper in the IDF, also very famous Hollywood film writer, Hurricane with Denzel Washington, a lot of great films. So we spoke pretty in depth about the Hamas situation. That's what people will hear for the first 30 minutes. But I know that you were on Fox this morning speaking about it. So I guess if you just want to comment on what's going on briefly, I mean, this is a major issue. This is the most tragic event really in the entire country of Israel since I've been alive, for sure. I know that retaliation is going to be absolutely brutal. Is there anything that you want to say though, briefly for our audience?
I would worry right now only because, and especially this week coming up on the 23rd anniversary of the attack on my ship, as I'm watching what is unfolding in the Middle East right now in Israel, I am hearing echoes of the 1990s again, where we did nothing. Listen to what everyone is saying. They all want to go after Hamas. Nobody wants to go after the true state sponsor that has given Hamas and Hezbollah and others the ability to recruit, finance, plan, train, and conduct these operations worldwide, and now horrifically against the country of Israel. If we don't start holding that state sponsor of Iran accountable, then it isn't going to matter. We might as well pack up our bags and walk away. And yes, it is going to be involved. We're going to be involved in another conflict. Yes, Israel is going to be involved in what is going to be a months-long, if not years-long conflict. But we cannot afford to let the state sponsors of this horrific type of acts, whether it's Russia in Ukraine, whether it is Iran in what's going on, China's paying attention. Strategically, they remain our number one threat. But unless we're willing to address these state sponsors and hold them accountable through sanctions and other means to essentially cut them off from the world, then guess what? We might as well pack up our bags, come home, and start sucking our thumb, because that's all we're going to be worth to anyone if they continue to roll over country after country after country.
It's Groundhog Day with Iran. It's Groundhog Day over and over, and then we're giving them money. We're giving.
Tragic. It was tragic this morning as I listened to the television and watched the Secretary of State throw the entire intelligence community under the bus. Okay, we don't know what we didn't know. That's going to come out over time. But when he says we got no indications and no warning of this whatsoever, what he's essentially saying is our intelligence community is so bad that we couldn't tell one of our closest allies what was going on, which means we can't protect the United States. And what do all of our other allies around the world now think? Wow, if you've got an intelligence community that really does that bad and doesn't know what's going on, how are you going to keep us safe from China? How are you going to keep us safe from the onslaught of Russia when it comes to NATO? I mean, the fact that that was even said by this administration is a stunning admission that may not even be true, because this is too close to what's happened. We have not had the benefit of time to find out, what did we miss? What did Israel miss that we could have helped them with? And oh, by the way, I find it difficult, if not impossible, to believe that in all those Arab countries, and especially Saudi Arabia and especially Egypt, had no idea that this planning was going on and that this attack was going to occur.
You know as good as Saudis are always there pulling strings. They always
they may be the 800-pound gorilla in that part of the world, but at the end of the day, I'll tell you what, at some point we need to make sure that we are going after these state sponsors, because if we don't, it is going to come here. And rather than 17 sailors and then thousands dead as a result of a 9/11 style, it's going to be tens, if not hundreds of thousands, depending on what they've managed to smuggle into this country.
Smuggle it. That's what I was going to say about the borders. I was like, what's happening. We were doing that for years. We've been working. We worked out GRS. We were, I don't care. It's not classified. People, we were down there working in Mexico, because for years there was this, and that was 15 years ago. That was before our attack. So
got 100 it's been going dead Americans from drugs that are precursor chemicals coming from China that the drug cartels are bringing across, and we're doing nothing to stop it. That is a wholly satisfactory breach of our national security.
It's unconventional warfare at its finest. And I'm saying that I'm not condoning it. I'm condemning it, but it is unconventional warfare at its finest right there. And that's what that is. It doesn't have to be a gunfight to kill people. It can be just like that. That's a fight. You're killing your enemy. Well, we're doing it with drugs and fentanyl. Well, they're still doing it, and they're doing it underneath the radar.
You know, Chris, having watched, seen the tragedy of what went on in Afghanistan, and we should not have pulled. I think we were still invested in there. Let's not.
I agree.
It took Korea 50 years to become a democracy. It doesn't happen overnight. Afghanistan was making strides, even though the naysayers want to whine and complain that they weren't. They were. And the fact that they were bearing the brunt of the fighting, but we were unwilling to hold Pakistan accountable.
There's no one.
That was doing. It was wholly unsatisfactory. And now nobody wants to say Iran. Let's call it like it is. Iran is the state sponsor that is directly responsible for the slaughter that is going on in Israel today through proxies in Hezbollah and Hamas. Go after.
That has been that happened to us in North Africa. It was Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood that Obama loved, and people can hate me. That was the truth. He loved them, so let's put them in charge. Let's destabilize the entire region because we think Hamas can take care of them. The Muslim Brotherhood. Sorry about that. Can stabilize, guys. It's the same damn thing. Muslim Brotherhood. It's Iran, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas. We're not going to get control under it if we have politicians that still back those guys. And we do. We had a president, and people are going to hate me for it. I don't give the crap they do. We had a former president and Valerie Jarrett's another one that loved those people and still do and support them and think they can. I don't know what they're thinking, but we're not going to fix it.
Once again, you have politicians that do not think through the second and third order effects of their decision and who do not have to live with the consequences of it because their children don't serve.
Exactly. They're going down a rabbit hole here. Sorry, guys. I didn't mean to go down that.
Good. But I think that we need to step back and take a larger strategic view of what is actually happening. Let's face it, the three destabilizing countries in the world today are first and foremost China, followed by Russia, and now Iran. And between all of them, we need to begin to take actions that hold them accountable. Yes, pain may be inflicted on your populaces because gas prices go up, or energy is impacted, or the economy is hit. But if we don't absorb some of that pain now, it will be worse later, and it will be measured in lost lives.
Brother, and I agree with you. I know you're saying Iran now, but I'm telling you, I've saw it as a problem when I was when we were in Africa, when I was in Afghanistan, when I was in Iraq. Iran was always behind all this shit. Absolutely. And we never did. And I remember giving them money. We never. So I agree with you, but are we going to hold it? How the hell? We fund them.
Doing things like, let's not forget, I was literally you should never be gleeful about someone dying, but I would put it that the sympathy meter didn't come off the left-hand peg when Soleimani got his just due.
Oh, I know. Well, on that note, I feel the same. I wish I could say that Iran is going to get its just due, but they're not until something. Something has to happen here, and it sucks. And it's got to happen, and that's what's going to happen for
not immediately. Right now, give Israel what they need to go after Hamas.
Yeah,
and push them
that's true.
You got to prioritize. Iran will be there for a while, but we can start putting things into place that are going to hold them account. Snap back that $6 billion for the humanitarian. Every dollar that we give them for humanitarian is a dollar that they get to now spend on Hamas and Hezbollah. Yeah. So let's start thinking others. They will be there in time, but it's time to maybe do the snapback sanctions that were taken out with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action or the nuclear agreement, put those on and begin to start to squeeze their economy. Because there are ways to hold Iran accountable without getting into a direct military confrontation with them. And those should be exercised starting now, not in 6 months, not in a year, but immediately.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the Israeli side too. I fully support Israelis, and the what I love, they're not their rules of engagement are a lot more favorable to their forces than sometimes ours are to our forces. And what I'm saying is, and I told Ian on the text, let them go. Let the IDF go. Let the Israeli special forces go. Let them go, and they will rip their shit off. It will tear them up because they are good and they don't care. They attack let their Air Force go kick the shit out of them. And I worry that we're going to stand in their way. We're going to stop like we always do. Hey, come on now. You're being too hard on them. Don't kill them too bad. Let's pull them back like we always do. Because they really could. They could go wipe those guys out in a heartbeat because they're that, in my opinion, they're that good. At least when I worked with them, I thought they were that talented, and they don't have the rules that we do as far as and I'm going to call them the politically correct rules. They don't care. You attacked us. We're coming. We're going to kill you. And that's it. It's done. And so we need to operate like that at sometimes. And we didn't.
It's wonderful to be respected in the world, but occasionally fear is an incredible.
Isn't it? Well, that's all I got.
Well, the only thing I'll put up is one last picture where I just want to show you guys that's USS Cole today. She is still out there defending freedom. I couldn't be more proud, and it has been an incredible honor to be on with both of you today. It's just been fantastic.
Oh, shut up, dude. You know that better. I know that better. You're like, Tano, I was on the show. Dude, you talk way too damn much. Shut your damn mouth.
He did not. It was good. I felt like I was talking too much.
Well, you're the guest. You're supposed to talk a lot, dude. Come on, you're the one. And we're public speakers. We talk a lot. That's what the fuck we do. So that's our part of our profession. And right now, like I said, aren't you working on your plane right now? So one last thing, the importance, if you could just tell the veteran, the importance of staying busy and to keep your head right. Cause I do think that's important. And you have a hobby. Like you said, you fly planes and you work on planes you have your own, don't you? Or something like that.
Several years ago, right as COVID was coming in, I said, look, whether you want to admit it or not, you might be getting on the back half of life. So what have you done that you've enjoyed so much, and start picking those hobbies and honing it? I love flying my airplane. Then I went out and I started homebrewing again. So I've got a 10-gallon steering system downstairs. You're committed to a hobby when you take and you chip an 8-inch hole in the side of your brick house to put in a vent hood, 4-foot great vent hood. Yeah, that's when you're committed to it. But those are the kind of things, plus like kind of the reloading and other things that go with that. Getting on the range is a good thing as well. So
I enjoy it.
All those things that I just love to do that I, pick the things you enjoy. And, for the people that may be considering retiring, I just tell them, make sure that you're not retiring from something. Make sure you're retiring to something.
Do something.
Make sure what you want to go do. Have your list of things you want to accomplish in the years ahead of you. Okay? Because you never know how short or long life's going to be, and you want to take every advantage to learn from it, to give back as much as possible, and to just sometimes take the time, sit back and enjoy it.
Well, I was going to say, you probably saw I was typing there for a second, because when you were talking about retiring and all that, the first segment I had Dan Gordon on, and this guy is constantly working on new stuff, whether it's new films, new books. And he's, you guys are young compared to him. I Googled it just to be sure. Dan Gordon is 76 years old. And I did ask him, I'm like, at some point, are you ever going to retire? And he was like, because he's an Israeli and American citizen. And he's like, retirement. He's like, although English is my first language, he's like, that's not my vocabulary.
Well, the question for me is, if you love what you do, why retire? You aren't retiring. You're just engaging in it in a different way.
Yeah, that's well said. My thing, like I said, my 8-year-old's here. I like being a father. When I'm home, I just want to hang out with him. And he's getting, I can tell when he starts to get tired, or he starts like, Daddy's, I've had it enough, because he does neck roll. He does this. So he's back over there doing the neck roll. So I said, hey, 30 seconds, just like a jump master, 30 seconds, but we're not ready to go.
I got all those commands down.
Well, is there anything else that you're promoting? I mean, the book has been out for a long time, of course. Front Burner, Al Qaeda's attack on the USS Cole. I know that you're still doing speaking engagements regularly with Keppler, but are you on any social media, anything like that? Anything you want to promote at all?
Pretty much these days, only social media I have is LinkedIn and Twitter. I'll get up on there and make some.
I'm the same way. Those are the only two I'm on.
It's, I will post stuff on Facebook maybe once or twice a year. But for the most part, I keep it professional on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Very cool. All right. So check out Kirk on LinkedIn and X, which is now Twitter. What's your handle on there?
At Kirk Lippold. Really difficult. So,
Perfect. So follow at Kirk Lippold on X, aka Twitter. And we appreciate you coming on. I mean, we went really long here between this, Dan Gordon, but I really think that the audience is going to appreciate this. I certainly do. I mean, I knew about the USS Cole, but not in this detail, just like most Americans. So it was an honor having you on.
And great stuff, buddy. That pictures I've never seen. Yeah, that the tin can. I mean, the inside of the galley there. That's amazing, brother. And I just appreciate that leadership is leadership regardless of what service you're in. I mean, really, you're always going to fall back to your highest level of training. Stay calm under duress, always push yourself, always work harder. You never stop working. I'd say find work. It's like when you're clearing rooms, you clear a room, we're still finding work. You got to go clear another room. It's the same. It doesn't make a difference what branch is. If you're successful as being a leader, it really is. It's the same recipe, and it's old school recipes. It's nothing that is something that's out. It's something that we were told as kids. You don't quit. When you fall down, pick yourself back up. Work hard if you want to be successful. And it sounds, and it's wonderful to hear you say it. First of all, it still validates what I'm saying. So I appreciate that. So it's like, well, I am still saying the right stuff out there, but also it's that the old school way of being a leader still is, to me, is the most successful way of being a leader. And you epitomize that again.
Leadership doesn't happen in the moment. It starts first and foremost as an investment in yourself, followed by an investment in the people that work with and for you.
Well said. Well, God bless you, brother. I appreciate you appreciate you coming on, and you're always welcome. Like we said, you want to come shoot. You're always welcome out here to come shoot. I was going to say you might want to wait till the spring. It's nice now, but it's going to start getting chilly out here. So maybe in the spring, but you're always welcome. And I'd love to have you at a course here. I know if we had you at a course here, you have people just ask you questions left and right. But you're always welcome out here.
I'd be thrilled to do that. Trust me.
We're
going to be careful what you just offered, because it is going to be taken off.
Well, I'll wait in the spring. We'll get you out here, and I got a place for you to stay. You don't have to stay in my guest room. We got a house for you out here. The range does, and you'll be out here going, man, it's quiet. You'll hear a damn soul.
If the roof doesn't leak and I've got clean sheets, I'm a happy camper. I mean, all these, as well as I do, we go to these speeches and they sometimes roll out the red carpet for us. And it's like, no, I don't need something this fancy. I'm content with just a nice little room, low key. Just get me away from the ice machine and the elevators, and I'm a happy camper.
That's all it is. But I ain't going to tell you, I won't turn. If they give me the presidential suite, I'll tell you, take it back. If they don't, I'm only going to ask them once.
Right.
And then I'm going to take it. I'm going to stay in there. But no, you're exactly right, brother. And but I'll take good care of you out here, and you're always welcome. And I appreciate you coming on the show. And sorry it took us so long. Should have had you on a long time ago.
Well worth the wait for me. This was thoroughly enjoyable.
That's all for this episode of Battle Line Podcast. But we're always posting new content on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Battleline Podcast and on Twitter at Battleline Pod. That's an order. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes up every Tuesday. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Believe in yourself. Face all challenges head on. And as always, never quit.